The thermometer outside reads 52 degrees below zero. That is not a misprint. 52 below zero Fahrenheit. The kind of cold where exposed skin begins to ache in seconds, where the moisture in your breath freezes before it clears your face, where the gravel on the Dalton Highway cracks like rifle shots as the permafrost beneath it contracts. And somewhere on that road, parked in the gravel just south of Atagun Pass, a truck driver is heating up dinner. Not at a restaurant, not at a truck stop, not at any place with a kitchen, a stove, or running water. Just a driver, alone in a sleeper berth, using a device that plugs into the truck's electrical system, heating a meal packed 2 days ago in Fairbanks. Because between Coldfoot at mile 175 and Dead Horse at mile 414, there is nothing. No diner, no gas station, no vending machine. Just the road, the cold, and 239 miles of silence. Most people who drive to work have never had to think about food as a survival variable. Food is a preference. You get hungry, you decide what sounds good, you go get it. For a truck driver on the Dalton Highway in January, food is something categorically different. It is part of the same calculation as fuel load, tire condition, and bunk heater function. Getting it wrong doesn't just mean discomfort. It can mean fatigue at the wheel on the most dangerous road in North America, decision-making errors at altitude in a whiteout, or a breakdown that a rested driver could manage calmly becoming a crisis for one running on gas station snacks and coffee. If you're watching this on television, take a second to subscribe and share this with someone who doesn't know this world exists. It's the simplest thing you can do that makes a real difference for this channel. So here is the question that almost nobody asks. How does a professional truck driver eat a hot meal at minus 50 degrees in a vehicle with no gas burner, no kitchen, and no grocery store within 200 miles? The answer involves more engineering, more planning, and more accumulated professional knowledge than most people would guess. And understanding it requires first understanding how broken the food environment of long-haul trucking actually is. Start with the numbers, because they are stark. In 2010, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, surveyed 1,670 long-haul truck drivers at 32 truck stops across the contiguous United States. More than 2/3 of those drivers, 69%, were classified as obese. 17% were morbidly obese. For comparison, roughly 1/3 of U.S. working adults in the same period were classified as obese, and 7% as morbidly obese. Truck drivers were running at double the national rate. 88% had at least one additional chronic disease risk factor: high blood pressure, smoking, or sleep disorders. Compared to 54% of the general working adult population, those numbers are not the result of drivers being uniquely unhealthy people. They are the predictable outcome of a food environment that is, by almost any measure, designed to produce those results. A driver running a tight schedule between a pickup in Seattle and a delivery in Denver has a 14-hour duty window and 11 hours of allowable driving. The actual time available to stop, find food, order, wait, eat, and return to the truck is measured in minutes. The options at 4 in the morning on a Wyoming highway are not a farmer's market and a smoothie bar. They are whatever the truck stop offers: a fried food counter, a wall of processed snacks, and energy drinks stacked to the ceiling. But the food environment of the Dalton Highway is something else entirely. It is not a failure of options. It is the near total absence of options across hundreds of miles of one of the most isolated roads in North America. The Dalton Highway runs 414 miles from Livengood Junction, about 80 miles north of Fairbanks, to Dead Horse at Prudhoe Bay on the Arctic Ocean. Built in the 1970s to support construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, it has never developed the food infrastructure that lower 48 highways take for granted. Between Fairbanks and Dead Horse, there are exactly 2 places where a commercial driver can stop for a meal and fuel. The first is Yukon River Camp at mile 56. The second is Coldfoot Camp at mile 175. Coldfoot is, by the standards of what surrounds it, extraordinary. It was started in 1981 by Dick Mackey, an Iditarod champion who parked a converted school bus at Coldfoot and began selling hamburgers to truckers on the Hall Road. The drivers who kept passing through liked the food enough that they helped build him a permanent structure, hauling materials north on their loads and doing construction work during rest stops. That founding story says something real about this corridor and the people who work it. Today, the Coldfoot Camp Truckers Cafe operates year-round, 24 hours a day, serving burgers, breakfast plates, soups, hearty food that makes sense in a place where January temperatures can fall to -50 or below. But Coldfoot sits at mile 175. Dead Horse is at mile 414. Between those 2 points is 239 miles of road with no services of any kind. No food, no fuel, no warmth except what the driver carries. This is where the planning begins, and where the hidden knowledge of experienced haul road drivers separates itself from what any newcomer could reasonably guess. The most common misconception about eating on any long-haul run is that drivers stop at restaurants for every meal. Many new drivers do, and the economics correct that behavior quickly. A sit-down meal at a truck stop runs $8 to $15, 3 times a day, over a 3-week OTR run. That is between $500 and over $1,000 in food alone. On the Dalton north of Coldfoot, that option doesn't exist at any price. There is the cab, and whatever the driver put in it before leaving Fairbanks. The solution experienced long-haul drivers have built over decades is a functioning mobile kitchen. Compact, efficient, designed around the specific electrical systems of a modern sleeper truck, and more capable than most people would expect. Understanding it requires a brief look at the electrical architecture of a contemporary rig, because that architecture is what makes hot food possible at the end of a 12-hour Arctic run. A modern full-sized sleeper truck runs on a 12-volt DC electrical system fed by the engine's alternator and stored in a bank of heavy-duty batteries. When the engine is running, that system is continuously recharged and can power 12-volt devices directly. But it is when the engine stops that the interesting engineering begins, because trucks operating in Alaska's extreme conditions also carry what is called an auxiliary power unit, an APU. This is a small, independent diesel engine mounted to the truck's frame, entirely separate from the main powertrain, that generates heat, air conditioning, and electrical power without running the primary engine. The federal MAP 21 Act provides a specific 550-pound weight exemption for APUs because they are recognized as essential fuel-saving technology. For Dalton Highway drivers, an APU is not a luxury. It is as necessary as the bunk heater. The APU feeds a power inverter, a device that converts the truck's 12-volt DC current into the 120-volt AC power that standard household appliances run on. Schneider, one of the country's largest freight carriers, equips its newer sleeper trucks with a factory-installed Eaton 1800-watt pure sine wave inverter as standard equipment. That 1,800 watts of AC power is enough to run a compact microwave, a slow cooker, a coffee maker, and a 12-volt refrigerator simultaneously. The image of a truck driver eating cold food out of a gas station bag is not just inaccurate for experienced drivers. It is decades out of date. Here is what a well-equipped long-haul driver might carry in a Freightliner Cascadia sleeper headed up the Dalton. A compact 12-volt compressor refrigerator, not a thermoelectric cooler, which merely reduces temperature below ambient, but a genuine compressor-driven unit like those made by Dometic, capable of maintaining freezer or refrigerator temperatures regardless of the ambient cab temperature. A 700-watt to 900-watt microwave, sized to run comfortably within the inverter's capacity. A Road Pro or similar 12-volt lunchbox oven. A sealed heating chamber that reaches about 300 degrees Fahrenheit using only 12 volts drawn directly from the truck's electrical system. No inverter required. A slow cooker, which draws only 150 to 200 watts during its maintain phase and can cook a full meal over 8 hours while the truck is in motion. And an electric kettle, because at -50 degrees, hot liquid is not optional. That last point deserves more attention. Because the physiological relationship between extreme cold and hydration is something experienced Arctic truckers understand viscerally, and the wider public has almost no awareness of. Cold air is dry air. When temperatures drop to -20 or -30 Fahrenheit and below, the atmosphere holds almost no moisture. Every breath a driver takes in extreme cold is an exchange with air that is profoundly desiccated. The body's airways work continuously to humidify that incoming air before it reaches the lungs, and that process extracts moisture from the body with every single breath. A driver working a 12-hour shift in these conditions, even inside a heated cab, is losing fluid in ways that produce none of the obvious sweat signals associated with warm weather dehydration. It accumulates quietly. Even mild dehydration, a loss of just 1 to 2% of body water, is associated with measurable reductions in concentration, reaction time, and short-term memory. On a road like the Dalton, where the margin for error on a loaded truck across Adagun Pass in winter conditions is narrow, that cognitive degradation is not a minor inconvenience. Experienced Dalton drivers drink constantly. Hot tea, hot broth, hot water with electrolyte packets, anything warm and liquid all day. The electric kettle in the cab gets more use than any other piece of cooking equipment. It is not a comfort item. It is a tool. There is also the caloric dimension, which is more complicated than it first appears. Research published through the National Academies of Sciences on nutritional needs in cold environments found that people working in cold conditions, even those in vehicles, not conducting outdoor physical labor, tend to have elevated caloric requirements compared to their activity level in temperate conditions. The thermoregulatory cost of maintaining core temperature in extreme cold, even when mechanical systems are carrying most of that load, adds to the body's energy demands. The sustained neurological vigilance required to drive difficult road conditions elevates glucose consumption, and the physical reality of even routine tasks in extreme cold. Walking across a frozen parking lot, performing a pre-trip inspection at -50, manipulating metal fittings with gloved hands, adds to the accumulated daily energy expenditure in ways that add up across a long operational day. A driver running a full Dalton winter run needs to eat more than one doing a comparable distance run in temperate conditions. And the quality of that food matters more, not less, when both the physical demands and the cognitive margin for error are elevated. A diet of gas station snacks and processed food doesn't just feel worse in extreme cold. It performs worse, producing a driver whose blood sugar spikes and crashes, whose fatigue accumulates faster, whose reaction times degrade more quickly in the back half of a shift. Veteran haul road drivers know this from years of feeling the difference, on a road where that difference has consequences. This is why the pre-trip food preparation rituals of experienced Dalton drivers are notably deliberate. Most stock their cab refrigerators in Fairbanks before heading north, treating provisioning with the same seriousness they apply to vehicle inspection. The goal is 3 to 4 days of real food, actual meals, not snacks, that can be heated in the cab, that store safely in a compressor refrigerator, that don't require elaborate preparation, and that deliver the nutritional profile the driver needs to function across a multi-day run. Soups and stews are a consistent favorite. A large batch of beef stew or chicken soup prepared before the run stores in sealed containers for 3 to 4 days, reheats completely in under 5 minutes in a microwave, and does several things simultaneously. It delivers calories, protein, and water. The liquid component of a broth-based soup is hydration. In an environment where the body is constantly pulling moisture from every breath, a bowl of hot soup at a rest stop is a physiological intervention, not just dinner. Drivers who have been on this road long enough have arrived at this conclusion empirically. Not from nutritional literature, but because the feedback loop out here is fast and unforgiving. Rice dishes are another staple. Rice cooked in a slow cooker or compact rice cooker, combined with pre-cooked proteins and whatever vegetables can be packed without degrading over 4 days, produces a meal that reheats in minutes, stores well, and generates minimal odor in a small enclosed space. That last consideration matters more than it sounds. A sleeper berth that smells like fried food after day 1 of a 4-day run becomes progressively harder to sleep in. And sleep quality on a haul road run is not separate from operational safety. It is part of it. The slow cooker running on the inverter during driving hours has become one of the most discussed pieces of cab cooking equipment in online trucking communities. The principle is straightforward. Load it before leaving a rest stop, set it to low, and arrive at the next stop 8 hours later with a complete meal already cooked. The power draw during the maintain phase is minimal, well within what an APU-charged system can sustain. And the result is a hot meal that requires no preparation time after a 12-hour shift through Arctic darkness. For a driver who needs to eat, rest, and be back on duty within a fixed window, that elimination of cooking time is not a small thing. It is the difference between eating well and not eating at all, because the alternative, stopping at a restaurant, does not exist north of Coldfoot. There are limits to what the cab kitchen can accomplish, and some of them are specific to extreme cold in ways that aren't obvious. One involves the refrigerator itself. A compressor refrigerator actively removes heat from its interior and exhausts it to the cab environment. In temperate conditions, this works exactly as designed. But in -50 conditions, the physics shift in an unexpected direction. The ambient temperature outside is far colder than the target interior temperature of the refrigerator. The unit doesn't need to run its compressor. The environment is already doing the cooling. And then some. If the cab loses heat during a long cold stop, the refrigerator can become a freezer. Soups, stews, and liquids packed in containers not designed for expansion can freeze solid, burst their seals, and become impossible to heat in a microwave without a 2-hour thaw cycle. Experienced drivers monitor the interior temperature of their refrigerators during cold stops, and some deliberately set the thermostat warmer than necessary during extended cold, idle periods, not to prevent spoilage, but to prevent freezing. This is the kind of operational knowledge that doesn't appear in any training manual. It is passed between drivers at Coldfoot, communicated in online forums at 2 in the morning, embedded in what a veteran tells a newer driver when they're parked side by side in the gravel north of the Yukon River crossing. It is accumulated professional knowledge, built over years of trial and error on a road that has real consequences for errors. The psychological dimension of food in extreme isolation is something veterans on this road feel deeply, even if they don't always put language to it. For a driver who may go 4 or 5 days without sitting across a table from another person in a warm room, the act of cooking and eating is one of the most powerful anchors of normalcy available. It is a decision made in the present tense, using the hands and senses, producing something tangible in an environment where almost everything is decided by someone else. The route, the cargo, the delivery window, the weather, the road. The time a driver spends assembling a meal from the contents of the cab refrigerator is one of the few genuinely self-directed acts of the day. Veterans on the haul road talk about their cab kitchens with a quiet pride that initially seems disproportionate to the object being discussed. A slow cooker, a compressor refrigerator, a modest collection of sealed containers. But the pride is not really about the equipment. It is about what those objects represent. The competence of having learned to take care of yourself, completely, in a place where there is no one else to take care of you, under conditions that most people would find overwhelming before they reach the first hill. The Dalton Highway sees roughly 200 to 250 commercial truck runs per month during winter operations, according to estimates from the Alaska DOT NPF. Those are the deliveries that supply the oil field workers and support infrastructure at Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, fuel, food, equipment, materials, all moving north on a single road with no alternative. Every one of those runs is made by a driver who has solved, in their own way, the problem of feeding themselves for 3 to 5 days in one of the most remote environments accessible by road in North America. There is a moment veteran haul road drivers describe in similar terms, though each puts their own words to it. Parked somewhere north of Coldfoot, in darkness so complete and silence so absolute that the only sounds are the APU and the heating system and the occasional crack of the frozen ground outside. Temperature somewhere below -40. 7 hours into a rest stop, midway through a run that started in Fairbanks and will end in Deadhorse tomorrow. And there is dinner. Hot soup or stew, something prepared beforehand and reheated, eaten in the warmth of the berth with the curtain drawn, a thermos of tea at the side. The space is small. The temperature outside is still trying to find its way in. The road tomorrow will have its own demands, but something about that specific moment, the warmth, the food, the deliberate self-sufficiency of having provided for yourself in a place where no one else was going to, is not unpleasant. The next time you see a commercial truck parked off the road in deep winter, or moving north on the Dalton through weather that has stopped every other kind of vehicle, think about what is happening inside that cab. Not just the sleeping, not just the heater running, not just the cargo secured against the cold. Think about the meal being prepared, the slow cooker working through the hours, the compressor refrigerator holding temperature against everything outside trying to override it. Think about the planning that went into stocking it in Fairbanks, and the accumulated knowledge that made the planning possible, and the person in the berth who has learned the empirical way, the only way that actually sticks, that taking care of yourself out here is not incidental to the job. It is the job. And if you thought feeding yourself at -50 without a kitchen was one of the more extreme challenges in professional trucking, wait until we talk about what happens when the road itself catches fire. When a wildfire corridor closes around a loaded semi, the rules change in ways that make the cold look magical.